Hi, my name is Gael Gallagher. I'm a tour director, have been for 27 years. It's my passion to share the beauty of where I live with you. I live in the beautiful town of Pacific Grove, which is on the Monterey Peninsula, and I'm also kind of a Steinbeck buff, or I love the words of John Steinbeck, because he wrote many novels that were about where I live. And I'd like to start my commentary before I bring you down to one of the most beautiful highways in the world with a location in Pacific Grove called Point Pinos. It's the southernmost point of Monterey Bay. It's chapter 6 in John Steinbeck's Cannery Row, and he's talking about Ed Ricketts, his very good friend, a marine biologist from Chicago, and Doc used to collect specimens along our rocky coast. And when he talks about this area, he'll talk about nudibranchs, nudie, naked, little snails that have evolved not to need their shells any longer. They're very colorful, reminding their predators that they're toxic. He'll talk about starfish, and when they feed, they bring their stomachs out to the food. And I'm going to well imagine that when you eat, you bring food into your mouths and down into your stomach. So if I get back to chapter 6, he said Doc was collecting marine specimens on the tip of the peninsula in the Great Tide Pool area. It's a fabulous place when the tide is in, a wave-churned basin, creamy with foam, whipped by the combers that roll in from the whistling buoy on the reef. But when the tide goes out, the little water world becomes quiet and lovely. The sea is very clear and the bottom becomes fantastic, with hurrying, fighting, feeding, breeding animals. Crabs rush from frond to frond of the waving algae. Starfish squat over mussels and limpets, and then they attach their million little suckers until the prey is broken from the rock. And then the starfish stomach comes out and envelops its food. Orange and speckled and fluted nudibranchs slide gracefully over the rocks, their skirts waving like the dresses of Spanish dancers. And black eels poke their heads out of crevices and wait for prey. That's the first paragraph or so of chapter 6 of Cannery Row. I'll leave the rest for your homework as we continue south along the beautiful Big Sur coastline. The Big Sur coastline starts at the Carmel River and it terminates down at the San Simeon, down by the Hearst Castle. It's a 90-mile stretch of Highway 1, a highway that runs the length of California, but the most beautiful segment, I believe, is the Big Sur Highway. It cuts through the Santa Lucia mountain range, and at times you're 1,000 feet above the sea. As you're driving down the coast, after a winter rain, Steinbeck would say it requires only a rich winter of rain to make it break forth in grass and flowers. The spring flowers in a wet year were unbelievable. The whole valley floor and the foothills too would be carpeted with lupins and poppies. Once a woman told me that colored flowers would seem more bright if you added a few white flowers to give the colors definition. Every petal of lupin is rimmed with white, so a field of lupins is more blue than you can imagine. And mixed with these were splashes of California poppies. These too of a burning color, not orange, not gold, but a pure gold were liquid and could raise a cream. That golden cream would be like the color of the poppies. That's John Steinbeck talking about our beautiful landscape that you could see almost anywhere in California. As we continue along that beautiful highway, there's some beautiful bridges that span some canyons there. One of the first bridges we come to about 20 miles south of here is the Bixby Creek, or the Rainbow Bridge. It sits 280 feet above the creek below. It's a beautiful expanse of highway. As we continue further down the coast, we come along beautiful resorts, eventually the River Inn, Post Ranch, Ventana, and oftentimes on tours we don't have much time to get past Nepenthe. Nepenthe is a Greek term that refers to a potion used to drown pain and sorrow. It was a little cabin that was built there way back in the early 1900s, where Orson Welles took his movie queen, Rita Hayworth, to honeymoon. They didn't stay long. Actually, she didn't stay long with Orson Welles, and Orson Welles thought it was, sold it to the Fassett family. They've owned it now since the 40s and thought it was too beautiful of a place to have just for themselves. They built a beautiful restaurant that sits 880 feet above the ocean below. A beautiful setting for lunch and a beautiful terminus for your trip on a Big Sur highway. Also, as we can continue on down the coast, past Point Lobos, that beautiful state reserve, the crown jewel of the California State Park system, where it has 7 miles of trails, wave-cut terraces, wildflowers, sea otters, harbor seals, migrating whales, a fascinating geology. As we continue a little bit further south, we have the home of Ansel Adams, who lived here, the very famous photographer that was so inspired by this area that he lived here, although traveled quite a bit in his photography down to Yosemite and the Pacific Southwest. Across the street, another family, the Weston family. Edward Weston and all his children were great photographers of the area, always capturing the moment of where we live. Point Lobos is an incredible splendor as we drive along the cliffs. We're on the edge of the earth. We're on the edge of the continent. Offshore, you would see kelp beds, the top of a giant forest. If we had the time, we could watch it grow, the fastest growing underwater plant in the world, and a habitat for all sorts of marine life. Some animals live in the holdfast, the root-like system. Some animals live around the water column using the plants and its blades as food or shelter. And the sea otter finds the penthouse and ties up in that kelp forest and secures itself after being busy all day, finding 25% of its body weight. And then eventually will tie up in that kelp bed to take a nap. If you want to be a sea otter spotter, you want to look out at a kelp bed. When it's a little more bumpy, you want to find 2 bumps. You want to find their pointy snout, and 3 feet down their body, their flipper sticks up. The sea otters used to number 15 to 20,000 along our coast before they were hunted by fur traders, and now they barely number 3,000, and now are threatened species under our Endangered Species Act. We have a lot to protect here. The coast could view migrating whales as we head down towards Big Sur. From November till the springtime, we have about 26,000 whales the size of a school bus, gray whales, that after feeding all summer long up in the Bering Sea and the Chukchi Sea, head down to the warm lagoons in Baja to have their babies. They can be seen just offshore, just past those kelp beds. And in their migration, they go down and they have their babies, the other ones mate, they come back up in the springtime. This is a biannual migration. They travel 12,000 miles, the longest migration of any mammal. Also, when we're in Big Sur, there's a couple of state parks. We go through the redwoods. California is a state of superlatives. Many things are the biggest, the best, and the most beautiful. From a band of coastline from Oregon down to Big Sur, we have coast redwoods, Sequoia sempervirens. They can grow from a seed the size of a piece of oatmeal, the length of your eyelash, can grow to be the tallest living things on Earth. At Pfeiffer Big Sur State Park in Big Sur, we have a grove of redwoods right near the entrance that are massive and hundreds of years old and can tell many, many stories. Also in the heart of Big Sur, we have some of the businesses where the locals earn their keep. The River Inn comes to mind, one of the first businesses you'll see, the lodging on your left, and on the right, we have a lovely restaurant and a gift store. And a fun thing to do in a sunny summer afternoon is come down to the River Inn and sit out back by the grassy area by the river, maybe take your wooden chair and put it on the river, and listen to a good old band there. In years of past, we used to have Jake Stock and the Abalone Stompers, and maybe sometimes today his Abalone Stompers still do play there, a fascinating resort there in Big Sur. And as you continue further, you have the wonderful Ventana Resort, sitting about a mile from the ocean. You can sit and have a lovely lunch with the ocean in the distance, sitting in the rolling hills of California. For 6 months of the year, our tourists are a little bit surprised to see the brown, dry landscape here in California, but Steinbeck had a different eye for that. He called them the golden hills of California. He said they were beckoning mountains with a brown grass love like you want to sit in the lap of a beloved mother. Another way of looking at that very dry landscape that we have 6 months of the year. If you have the time, you can go past Nepenthe. The road still remains quite beautiful. It gets a little more twisty and a little more arduous to drive. You'll pass the Henry Miller Memorial Library. Henry Miller lived in Big Sur for 18 years. He wrote the book called Big Sur and the Oranges of Hieronymus Bosch. But he's a little more famous for 2 books that were banned in this country and in Europe called The Tropic of Cancer and The Tropic of Capricorn. They were said to be sexually explicit. I don't think we would blink at what was written today, but back in those days they were banned in this country and throughout Europe. Many people have been inspired by Big Sur. Linus Pauling lived down there. Henry Miller, of course. Richard Brodigan lived down in Big Sur. As we journey further down, you can go as far south as the Hearst Castle, which is the southern terminus of Big Sur. And that's another tour in itself to see the property that was built by Julia Morgan for William Randolph Hearst. She also built a beautiful complex in Pacific Grove, California called the Asilomar. And while she's building Asilomar, she's building the Hearst Castle. First licensed woman engineer in this country. She was schooled at the University of Paris at Beaux-Arts before they took a woman. She was in a man's world. 850 buildings to her name. I'm so blessed to live here, and I'm so blessed to be able to share the beauty with you. And there's so much to share with you in these few moments. I hope I gave you a little inkling of what we're so very passionate about here.